Hello, and everyone. Okay, so I'm hoping that you've all managed to find this link. Okay, I know we had a few technical difficulties. That's what Corona does to you. But basically, there's just so many amazing Oxbridge applicants that the website is having a few technical difficulties, but you should be able to see this stream for those hopefully on the website, but also on a YouTube link as well. We're still waiting for some people to join us. You know, this is what happens when you have a panel with Bangladeshi and Pakistani and ethnic people. They're always late. I don't know if anyone else can relate. So while everyone kind of jumps in, I just wanted to quickly explain to you all kind of a bit of the academic background of university, because this panel is very much going to highlight the most academic aspects. So when you hear things like, let's start off with lectures, okay? Now, remember, in Oxford and Cambridge, these are collegiate institutions. So in Oxford, you have a number of colleges. Same with Cambridge, you have a number of colleges as well. And when you apply for an undergraduate, you are studying that subject at that college. So for example, for my undergraduate, I did psychology at Wolfson College in Cambridge. Now, the college aspect I think is really important because it's about your accommodation, it's kind of your cohort, it's kind of the place where they look after your mental health. So the place where you eat, sleep, live, the college is really important. But when you hear things like lectures, so when you have lectures at Oxbridge, that is all the colleges combined. So if I am having a lecture in psychology, it's every psychology student in my year around the whole of the university. So that's what lectures are. Now, you might hear something called tutorials. Now, this is what is the famous Oxbridge education. Tutorials, which are by Oxford, and supervisions, which are by Cambridge, which essentially is a very kind of small one-to-one or small group 1 to 3 kind of tutoring style, where you have a leading academic and they are essentially teaching you. So you have your big lectures where you learn a lot of broad stuff, and then you have more specific tutorials. Now, don't underestimate this tutorial aspect, because for me, it was one of the best things about Cambridge or Oxford. You really are with some of the leading academics. There have been times where in my psychology A-level, when you're reading this study was created by Donzelot et al., and then you go to uni and you're actually being taught in a supervision or tutorial by Donzelot. So this is the person you used to read about back then. And this is very common in Oxford. Remember, you have leading academics. So that very briefly is what I wanted to kind of highlight: lectures and tutorials. So you'll hear a lot of that today. So I'm hoping that our panelists are all here and on time. Fingers crossed, everyone. If you can turn your cameras on. Hello, everyone. Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for being late. You really kind of are representing our culture and our people really amazingly. Okay, so hello everyone. So this panel, I kind of just already highlight this, going to be focused more on the academic side of things. And so I very briefly just want to introduce each of the panelists that we have today. Okay, so first up, we have Rafia. Can you wave your hand?
Hi, everyone.
So this is Rafia. Rafia is a British Bangladeshi. That she grew up in Tower Hamlets. I think we all know Tower Hamlets by now, which is in East London. She did her A-levels in biology, chemistry, maths, and further maths. So no surprise. What is she studying? She's studying medicine, and she's in her first year studying medicine at Magdalen College. Rafia is also a first-generation student. So shout out to Rafia. Next, we have Sabia. If you can raise your hand. So Sabia is a British Pakistani from Luton. So you go from Tower Hamlets to Luton. And she did her A-levels in law, sociology, and English literature. And she's now on the foundation year program at Lady Margaret Hall College, and she's studying on the law pathway. We have Yusuf. So Yusuf is actually Anglo-Asian. So he is half white and half Pakistani. And he's from North London and is a first year studying for his undergraduate at history at Oriel College. He did his A-levels in history, French, and economics. And also, Yusuf is a member of the Oxford Football Club, right?
I'm not sure if Yusuf's here, actually.
Yeah, the Oriel football team, yeah.
It's not about Yusuf is here. So, yes, he's part of
Muhammad Saleh.
I wanted to highlight that he does football because please don't think you're going to get any sports advice from me. So finally, we have a sports person here. And last but not least, we have Usama. So Usama is a British Bangladeshi, and this guy is all over the place. He grew up in Hackney, I think in Tower Hamlets, I think in Manchester. And he basically studied for his undergraduate in Arabic and Islamic studies at Oxford in 2004.
Yeah.
Right?
That's when I matriculated.
So 2004 is when he started. He graduated, I think, in 2008. And then he did his master's and his PhD at Princeton University. He's now a department lecturer in contemporary Islamic studies at the Oriental Institute at St. Anthony's College. So Usama is our student, graduate, and our academic on the panel. Okay, so hello, welcome everyone. I firstly have explained to the audience what supervision and what a lecturer is, because I want to get into it straight away, okay? The academic side of Oxbridge. This is not to be taken lightly, but also this is probably my favorite thing. Now, this is obviously for British Pakistani and British Bangladeshi, which we know represent a very small number of students in Oxbridge. So the first question I want to ask is, you've just had your first lecture, okay? It's on your timetable. You wake up early, you pack your bag, you pack your laptop, you get your pens and pencils from TK Maxx, and then you decide, okay, you're going to go into your lecture. I don't know about you, but the first thing I saw was, I'm back in 1603. Everyone here is white. And when I mean everyone, I mean a good portion. You know, there's like 9% white students, and you have a few ethnic minorities who are usually kind of international students who are dressing really well. And I'm thinking, I'm the only poor brown person here. I want to get your reaction, if you even had one, on that culture shock when you are at your first lecture and the first thing you see is, oh my God. Your initial reactions to such a white student body. And I want to ask Usama first. Let's go back in 2004.
Sure. I mean, so my view, I'm going to be brief because I'm not sure I'm as representative of how people experience it now. But when I was here, and we actually had a bit of a pre-session, and I remember Rafia commenting, you know, that you were like, not to steal your thunder, but you were the only hijabi, like, in your sort of medical lecture. And it was even more like that. I think now you've got quite a few people wearing hijab in the university. But when I was here, I was really struck by, you know, it's very different from Tower Hamlets, definitely. It's very different from Manchester or South Manchester, where I grew up. And so, you know, that was something that struck me. But once you get into your work, I mean, for me, it was once I got into my work, I kind of forgot about that situation because of a lot of work pressure, so to speak. So that's all I'll say, and I'd like to hear how things might have changed for people right now. Sorry, you're muted.
Technical difficulties. So let's jump to Rafia. Yeah, let's talk about that, because you mentioned that you're the only hijabi, which is not something that seems to be, you know, it seems to be quite common for a lot of hijabis. Can you explain that process?
Mm-hmm. So I started university this year, and obviously because of the pandemic, not all of us were allowed to be in the lecture theatre at one time. So we were split into different groups. And when I went in like my group, there was no other hijabis. And like, obviously for me, it was a bit like, am I going to be the only one in the year group? Like, am I going to be that token brown girl? And I was like, oh no. It turned out there were more hijabis. So there are quite a few of us. There were about like 4 of us. And we were kind of like split amongst the groups. And when we did find each other, it was like, yes. So like one of them, like I'm really good friends with. But I think it was the same, like when you went in and you see all these white people and you're like, is it just me? Or there's like, you know, the cluster of brown kids or like ethnic minorities. But it does turn out that there are like more of us than you expect, and we do form like a really good community there. So it's nothing to worry about. But obviously there's still so much room for improvement, definitely.
Perfect. I want to ask you a quick follow-up question, actually. I remember mentioning that being quite important when you go into lectures and you kind of have your support group, and it can come from people who look like you. And a white student said to me, like, why though? Like, why would you why do you need that? In your words, because medicine is is a very diverse, to the extent Oxbridge can be diverse, is kind of diverse. So why is it important to kind of want to study with people that kind of come from a similar community to you?
Mm-hmm. So obviously, like you said, I grew up in Tower Hamlets. So from going from to Tower Hamlets to Oxford is very different, where like everyone's brown to everyone's white. And I think it's really important to have people like you, just because when you're like learning about things, I think some stuff that white people might not understand about you, like the fact that with our religion, like the fact that we have to do stuff about it, a lot of them, like they grew up in the north, in the middle of nowhere, and they've never seen us. Like, they've seen us in the media, and the way the media represents us is not like a very good way. So often they have these biases, and sometimes it's quite difficult to, I think, overcome them, especially by yourself as a person. So I feel like if you're in a group and you have that community, then it's often a lot easier to be able to explain to people like what you're doing and like why, etc.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's something beautiful about having familiarity. But even on an academic level, I found that when I did do kind of psychology, I always tended to kind of go towards the more brown people. Even when I was at law school, the same thing. It was the black and brown people. And even now, my master's is the black and brown people. And sometimes it's just because the course, at least what we get in humanities and social sciences, is very white. And I think sometimes, you know, you want to be like, oh, you know, could we decolonize that aspect? Or could we bring a more could we bring kind of more, could we highlight more people of color academics inside here as well? I think for me in psychology, one thing that whenever we do studies on is, you know, we study participants, right? And it's usually always white people. And so I think also having that group of friends who, you know, are from a similar background to you, you can almost just, you can critique it more collaboratively. Usama, you have your hand up. Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just also thinking there's a dimension where you want to see people who you can aspire to. And when you're sort of like that small group or a small minority, it's like it can be a bit de-aspirational sometimes or demotivational. And I think that's something that you know, it's not something that many people, you know, from a white background might have to worry about or even think about. But when you're like, you know, I'm from Tower Hamlets, I really stick out like a sore thumb here. And do I really belong here? And you start feeling imposter syndrome. Those are things which, you know, if you have a community of people, it helps you get through a lot more easily.
Completely agree. Okay, let's go to Yusuf now. So as a first year, how did you, because history, you know, is one of those subjects that is, you know, very much humanities. How did you react to a culture shock of just first realizing, wow, I'm different? Or did you not have that?
So for us, during our first term, we didn't have any lectures in person due to the coronavirus pandemic. But however, we had on the first week an induction where we met all our lecturers and all the other history students in our year. And it was surprising because I was the only Asian male in the hall, and all of the lecturers were white, and everyone else in the room was white, bar two people. None of them were of Pakistani or South Asian descent, I believe. So in terms of that, it was a bit of a culture shock because in North London, where I grew up, it's a lot more diverse. So when you enter that hall, it's like, oh, I'm going to be the only Pakistani on my course. However, my tutors for history, they're quite keen on putting ethnic minority historians on the reading lists. So it also depends on what period of history you study. But for modern history, if you choose one of those segments, my lecturers, I can speak for my lecturers, they're very forward and proactive with putting ethnic minority historians to give a different perspective from Eurocentric history. And I think that's something that's changing, and it's quite good to see.
I completely agree. Even the Department of Education for my master's now, we've kind of highlighted that, you know, we would love to see a bit more BAME writers, and they've been quite supportive of it. Sabia, let's go to you, because now this is the foundation year. The foundation year is kind of known, quite popular for being, you know, taking in quite a lot of diverse students. So how can you explain your reaction, or if there even was one, when you kind of first went into those lecture halls, online or in person?
So on foundation year, you don't actually have lectures, you have group sessions. So each year it depends how many students you have. This year we have 8 students. So the most we'll have is like a communication or society and culture lesson together. So 5 of the 8 students are ethnic minorities. So 3 of them are South Asian, 3 are Black, which is actually great. It was very surprising for me because we have the current foundation years and also the old foundation years at LMH. It's very, very diverse, but it's like compared to Oxford, it was surprising. It's not a lot. There's like a small community of us, but it's a lot more than I thought. I thought there'd be loads and loads of white people and I'd be like the only person. So like Rafia was like, oh, I was the only hijabi. I thought I would be the only brown girl, but that genuinely wasn't the case. And I've been surrounded by a lot of ethnic minorities at LMH. So yeah, I didn't really have that big of a culture shock, to be honest, until I got into actual Oxford and I met people from different colleges. That was when it happened.
One thing I would like to highlight is you get used to it. I don't know if it was Alva can relate to that, but I think there comes a point where you kind of get used to it. And I think for me, my law school year after Cambridge, I was like, you know what, I'm so used to it by now. Like, let's just get on with the program. But I think it's important, as you've all said, to when you start that initial kind of course, is to kind of, be around people that are familiar with you. Okay, I'll move on to the second part, which is acknowledging the famous workload of Oxbridge. And sometimes I feel like when I talk to students, when we're trying to mentor them, I don't want to sugarcoat it. I want to be very honest as I can. The workload is tough. You are going to be pushed academically. Now, personally, I want that. I want to be pushed to my, the best ability. I want to work with the most academic individuals in the world. I mean, I say that now. When I actually have an essay and I'm kind of crying, maybe I think differently, but what I do want to say is I want to be pushed. I want to talk about your workloads. And I want to start off with Rafia because, I mean, it's medicine. And someone even commented actually right now on the live chat, you're doing medicine. It's such a competitive course, such a hardworking course as well. Kind of how did you, number one, deal with the workload? But also, just a follow-up question, is there anything that maybe you wrote on your personal statement to kind of stand out?
Okay, so I'll start off with like the workload. So in obviously medicine's one of those harder subjects. It's a bit of a like fat timetable with us. So I think weekly, I'd say I get about 12 to 16 lectures or practicals and 2 to 3 essays and 2 to 3 tutes a week. So that's kind of like the rough timetable. It sounds like a lot, and it is a lot compared to a lot of other subjects, I do know, but it's definitely doable. I think that's one thing that I have to say, like, if you schedule your time out right, it's definitely like doable and you have time to like relax and have your social life. And in terms of like standing out, like I've seen this question just pop up. So I think when you're applying to Oxford, like for medicine, it's quite hard to stand out because everyone that you see, they'll have the same grades as you. They'll have like the same, like the personal statement is such a like general thing. What I've been told is personal statements aren't like a huge, they don't play a huge role when applying to medicine. It's the interview where you stand out really. And the way you can stand out is, I think people don't really tell you this, but it's about saying your thoughts out loud. It sounds stupid. It sounds like you don't want to say something because you're going to sound dumb. No. They want to hear every little thing that's going on in your head. And I think that's one way you can stand out.
Thank you for that. I really admire you as a medic. See, Rafi's in her first year, but I think even Usama knows this as well. When you've been around medics and you see them in their first year, second year, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, they really live in Oxbridge. Okay, Usama, can we jump to you on that kind of workload aspect? Kind of how did you deal with that initial workload? Rafia said that, one thing that's really important is timetabling. Do you have any advice about that?
So, I mean, some of this is going to be going back quite a bit, and in a sense, I still live with an Oxford workload, as a lecturer, right? But I'm at the other end. I'm sort of setting the workload to a certain extent. I'd say that Oxford is a kind of sink or swim situation. They really throw you in the deep end. You've gotten in because those people who are sort of applying, they're very passionate about the subject. And that, that's, I think, another aspect of what makes you stand out. What can show that you're really passionate about the subject? How much shadowing have you done? How much extracurricular volunteering, etc., in something like medicine, or in the humanities, like how widely have you read well beyond your curriculum? And if you've got that passion, hopefully it will shine through in your personal statement, and hopefully it will shine through in the interview. And then when you get here, yes, it'll hit you like a ton of bricks, so to speak, the workload, but that's what Oxbridge is about. It's about taking the most talented people, putting them in the deep end, and letting them learn to swim by doing that. And hopefully by the end of the first term, it's a challenging, grueling first term with a huge workload, but you work hard, you play hard, and you come through in the end, and that's how you manage. I mean, you have to learn to have that balance. And you'll figure it out. Everyone figures it out. And that's where also the social life, which I really feel sorry for you guys who are sort of dealing with Corona right now, but the limited social life can't be very helpful. And we're at the other end, let me just say, as a tutor, I've been told, bear in mind the impact of Corona and try and be as supportive as possible. So your tutors are there to give you that support as well. And we will help you get through, so to speak.
I definitely agree with what you said, the work hard, play hard. I will say, in both unis, Oxford and Cambridge, I'm surrounded by some of the hardworking students ever. who also know how to party. And I kind of low-key love that about them. They want to get that essay down so they can either go to the club or they can have a movie night or something. But work hard, play hard, I think is a really important point. Yusuf, I want to jump to you because, Usama kind of said that, Mukamas term is a beast. For me, it was the hardest term ever. Can you kind of talk about your experience, the fact that you kind of just had it? What was Michaelmas term like for you? Which, by the way, for those who don't know, Michaelmas is the kind of winter term. So it's your first 8 weeks at Oxford. How was that like?
So I'm studying history, and my flatmate studies medicine, and I feel sorry for Rafi and other medics because whenever he comes down, he's always stressing about how many lectures he has or how many essays he has. And then compared to me, for history, I only have 1.5 essays a week. However, the level to which you have to go in depth with your essays is a huge step up from A level. And that's something I noticed. Whilst you may not have the same amount of lectures or essays to do as medics or STEM subjects, the level to which you have to go in depth with your essays is really a huge step up from A level and GCSE. And the main part is, what I've noticed is it's a huge step up in the independence you're given with essays. Whereas during A level, you've got your textbook, you read your textbook and you parrot it or you copy and repeat it in your own words. With history at uni level, you'll have a huge reading list with tons and tons of books and articles and podcasts, and it's up to you to dedicate your time to organizing which to read firstly, how to read them, improving your reading techniques, and then getting a huge range of reading sources and then creating an essay. So I say simple, but a 2,000 word essay, which might only take 3 hours to write, could take up to 2 days just to plan the essay. So in terms of that, it's a huge step up.
And I kind of want to ask now, that step up you're talking about, sometimes it's difficult for a lot of students. There's this rumor spread around that, your first year university is easier than your A levels. I found that not to be true with Oxbridge, but I kind of want to ask you guys now, has there been a moment where maybe you were struggling academically and you kind of, needed help with that step up? Someone mentioned that there are tutors to help. I'm just wondering if anybody has maybe struggled and then they reach out to a tutor. Rafa, can we start with you?
Yeah, so I think one thing about medicine at Oxford that's different to all other unis are the fact that we have essays, and sometimes I find myself doing more essays than like humanities students, and I'm like, I swear I was a science student, what's going on? But I found that quite difficult because the last time I wrote an essay was probably like GCSE time, so for me it was like essays. And then another thing that I found was that when I was doing the essays, whilst I wasn't doing bad, I wasn't doing like amazing. And I feel like the people around me were doing better. So obviously for me, it was a thing of what's going on. Like, I know like I'm not used to essays, but surely I'm not this bad. And what I did was I just reached out. So I asked my tutor, like I emailed him and he said, like, Rafia, you're on the right track. You're doing fine. Just keep going. But I still knew that I had to do something. So I did ask like another medic. So I asked like my peers, but also some people who are in the older years, because, they've had that 1 year above us, they've had that experience. And once I reached out, they gave a lot of advice, a lot of help. I implemented all of that. And then I saw the next week, my essays went like from a 5 out of 8 to a 7 out of 8. So it really does help.
So you kind of asked help from a tutor, and then you also got help from your community as well, from other peers, which I think is perfect. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And, in your instance, it worked amazingly. Sabi, I want to ask you now, kind of the foundation year, because you said it's a smaller cohort. Number one, I want to ask you is, could you actually explain a bit more about the foundation? Because we've had some questions that just kind of, what is the foundation year of law? And number two is, if you could talk about the workload, what's kind of involved in that and how you got support if you were struggling with it?
Yeah, so Foundation Year is a 1 year fully funded course by LMH. So you're a student at Lady Margaret Hall, but not matriculated into university. It's targeted at disadvantaged students, so people from, I think it's Polar 3 and Polar 4, don't quote me on that, areas, if you're free school meals, things like that, students that have had real disadvantages in their life that would have affected their studies and may not typically be accepted into Oxford. So it's kind of a year course to help them bridge that gap from A levels to undergrad, so that once you complete the foundation year course, you are fully equipped with the skills to go on to undergrad. So the second question was my workload, wasn't it? Yeah, so for me personally, I don't have lectures. No foundation years have lectures. I have 2 tutorials a week, sometimes 1. They're 2 hours long normally, and I'll get an essay with that. So each essay I get about 10 pieces of reading. It really depends. It varies in length as well. Sometimes they're books, sometimes they're articles. It's very different to undergrad personally, I think. And then what else do we have? So we also have communication skills. So that's a 2-hour session every 2 weeks with a guy called Matthew. So at the moment we're working on presentations. And then we also do society and culture lessons. So that's with our principal. And we'll basically just suggest things that we want to learn. So recently we've been doing politics because a lot of us feel that we don't know much about politics. We want to know more. So we spend 2 hours every 2 weeks. And right now we're looking at politics. In terms of struggling with workload, I definitely was. As everyone was saying, it's a big jump. Even though my workload is definitely not as heavy as undergrads, it was a lot for me to deal with. So we have Margaret Croom and Lady Margaret Hall, who is a study skills basically specialist, and she's amazing. You can just email her. I'm not sure if every college has someone like that, but we do. I also just said to my tutor, so I think Rafia, you mentioned you just said straight to your tutor. I was just like, hey, I don't know how to write this essay that you want me to write. And he was like, okay. And he spent 10 minutes, went through it. And then I also spoke to my peers and I was like, how are you going about this? But that was kind of the best way for me to go around it.
I think one thing to highlight, a question that actually somebody asked is, do you have to have that kind of skills to timetable yourself, to, work differently before you actually come to Oxbridge? And one thing I would say about myself is I was the king of timetables. Every single moment I was doing something before. And the moment I got to Cambridge, I was like, I don't know, I just maybe became, there was just so much to do, there was so much societies and there were so many events to go to. But I think one thing that I learned was to work smarter. And I think, we mentioned that, you are given a lot of books to read. For example, in sociology, in A-level, we read a textbook and we read a summary of like what Karl Marx says. In undergrad, we get his whole book, and it's little things like if you are doing a certain topic and it's based on Karl Marx, is you find the chapter, you don't read the whole book, you find the chapters instead, or you find keywords. And I think that there are skills that you learn once you're here. So I kind of want to ask kind of everyone, I guess, and we'll have Usama, which is kind of, what is your take on this? And has that happened to you where you've learned skills, or maybe as a tutor, you kind of recommend skills to learn?
So this is, I think this is really an excellent question. And both the way you framed it and the original question, like, do you need to get this before you arrive in Oxford? And what I'd say is that, in a sense, having a lot of those skills in advance will really help you. But if your passion and your talent shines through, you can probably still get here, but you need to hit the ground running. I personally am a big fan of sort of what I sometimes call like academic self-help literature. So Stella Cottrell has got a book called Study Skills Handbook. It's in its 4th edition with Routledge. For those in the humanities, as an undergraduate, I used this fantastic book, which I now actually recommend to all my students, called How to Write Better Essays. And there's lots of books out there like that in, a certain section of, if you go to Blackwell's or any other bookshop. And you should really I actually even used, like, you could get handbooks, short books like How to Get into Oxbridge. I don't know if they're still published. This is like a long time ago. And, take advantage of this. That shows initiative, and it will help you calibrate your style, your timetabling, your ability to, like Mohammed Ibrahim was saying, like read surgically, because you don't have the time to read the whole book. When you're writing an essay and you're given literally like 5 or 10 books to read for an essay in a week's time, it's impossible. No tutor would ever do that. I can tell you from the other side, right? But it's about reading surgically and reading strategically and learning how to do that. And so, I do recommend sort of taking full advantage of that sort of literature and the peer learning stuff that's been mentioned here, asking your friends, asking older colleagues in your subject. They will give you kind of like the lowdown on how to get through.
And I think that that's one of the differences, when we're coming from our areas or our communities then to Oxbridge, is before we never really had someone that we could ask for help from, I didn't have like a parent or an older brother or someone. I had an older brother, I just didn't like it, who I could ask for help with. And now, you're in this institution where help almost is everywhere. You just have to ask for it. And I want to just talk about that, which is, a lot of us come from communities where you have to have that tight family knit, but some of our families don't know Oxford. They don't know what the work life is. And some people might think that, you know, you're going to Oxford, you're changing, you're not replying to my messages anymore, vice versa. It could be that maybe you feel like you're neglecting your family. So I kind of want to ask, and we'll start off with Yusuf on this, is how are you dealing with managing the workload, but also kind of maintaining that family balance as well?
Yeah, so for the first term, I was at college for the whole term. At the moment, I'm in London back at home. I think most people at my college have stayed home this term. But for the first term, I would always call my mum when I got free time nearly every day. I know some people might do once a week, once a day. It really depends person by person. But I would FaceTime my mum. She'd always make me show my rooms to make sure I was cleaning up and stuff like that. So I have a schedule where I do work in the morning and then take a break for lunch and then try and do as much as I can before around 8 p.m. And then that's when I would wind down and contact my parents. Sometimes I've got an essay due. I might work a bit later into the night. But I think it is manageable to maintain relationships with people, especially during coronavirus. It's really important just to have that family support or friend support.
Rafia, can we ask you on this? Because like you said, medicine is demanding. How do you juggle that?
So I think similar with Yusuf, that in first term I was in Oxford and right now I'm at home. And I think when I was there, again, I did like, my mom rang me like every day in her lunch break, and I was also on my lunch break. Like I'd always take an hour out for lunch, and I'd like make sure I'd speak to her for a few minutes. Like literally, even if it's just a couple of minutes, like, yes, I'm okay. Yes, I've drank water today. Like, you know, literally stuff like that. And then like in the evenings, I would like have like a short FaceTime. I think sometimes, like you said, like sometimes I'm working, I'm writing my essay, and I just leave them there. Like I'd be typing up on my essay and I'd put my phone on the table, and it's just sometimes it's just nice to know that they're there. Like when you're at home, you'll hear them like, you know, watching TV or something downstairs and like your little sibling screaming or something. So sometimes it's nice to have that background noise. But then obviously like when they realize like, you know, you're working, they're just like, okay, yeah, we leave now, bye. And I think that helped them understand that, you know, it's quite demanding that you are working at like dodgy hours of the day. I think coming back home also really helped because they saw, like, they physically see now, like, I'm working at these times. They know that I'm not just chilling around, and that really did help. And it does help, like, even though I know a lot of people won't get that, obviously we got that because of COVID, this also happens during the holidays where, you know, right before you come back, right before you go back to uni, you have exams. So because of that, the last half of your holiday, you are revising for those exams, and they'll see you revising. And if they know this is just revision for exams, and they know that the work during it will also be like that, so I think that does really help them understand how the workload is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that sometimes it's really difficult for them to actually see you work hard until you're there. We have a question from the audience, which I want to ask Usama, which is, how do you deal with procrastinating, managing a big workload? Yeah, it'll be amazing to hear your kind of tips on this.
This is a struggle for everyone, guys. I mean, like I'm a sort of lecturer, and I will, I've got a couple of essays to mark, which I've been sitting on for the last 5 days. And it's, at the end of the day, sometimes you really need to set yourself a deadline and say, look, I'm going to do this because I've got so many other things to do. And there's so many things to be excited about. Procrastination is, I'm going to actually, again, sort of quote, I forget the book I read. I read this book on willpower by someone called McGonagall. She's a professor at Stanford or something like that, Stanford University in the US. And it really helped me think through, okay, why am I procrastinating, and how am I going to get through this? And now, you have to procrastinate sometimes. It's just natural human nature. But when you have a hard deadline, the key is to get some bit of it started right now and see if that propels you. That's what works for me. And I think everyone's going to try and work out how to deal with that. When you've got your essay deadline and you start experiencing essay crises, then you'll sort of learn how to deal with procrastination. And by the time you're at the end of your first year, you should have been able to deal with it, hopefully. That's my take.
Sabia, can I put that question to you? Because you're at home now as well. How, like, are you procrastinating? Or, you know, how are you dealing with that kind of, with that workload as well from home?
Yeah, so I've actually come back to LMH, but I came a few days ago, so I can still comment on this. But to be honest, I think at home it's very difficult. It's different to being at uni because you've got your family around. Like I've got 3 nieces and nephews, so I'm like, oh, I want to go spend time with them, but I also need to do my essay. And the thing that I had to do was literally take out my morning. So I knew no one was going to be awake in the morning. Everyone would be at work or doing something. So I would dedicate specific amounts of time to doing my work. And I'd be like, okay, this set time, I'm going to sit at my desk, I'm going to do my work, get it done. And that way I can enjoy the rest of the day. Did that work? I don't know. We'll find out from my grades. But it wasn't the easiest. It's difficult. It's just, I think what Osama was saying, the more you do it, the more you understand. It's really hard to kind of still be in a situation like, oh, I'm dealing with it. But the reality is that I'm not. And that's okay. Like we try. And by the end of the year, hopefully I will be. But
I think we tried. You kind of, you need to sometimes make mistakes to learn. I completely agree with. One thing I will say is I actually never went back home. During my time at Cambridge, I never went back home during any of the holidays, including summer. Same for law school, and even now, obviously now with COVID. And I think that's because for me, I didn't want to go back home. My family very dysfunctional. We live in a horrible council home, so I don't want to get mold disease or God knows. So for me, I stayed at Cambridge, and now I'm staying at Oxford, and I want to highlight that Oxford and Cambridge, they do allow that. If you do want to stay, during those 6 weeks worth of holidays, you can do that. And sometimes you kind of need that, to be surrounded by the libraries. One thing, like I said, for the first time, I was surrounded by people who were like really academic, and I really enjoyed studying in those group sessions, studying at night, doing all-nighters with your friends next to you. It's crazy, but it's nice. I think having that support. Okay, we have a few more questions in the audience. But one thing that I want to ask you, and this is something that I'm kind of asking all the panelists, is it would be really kind of interesting to hear what your favorite experience was at Oxford, but kind of on an academic level, like one point where you thought, you know what, like I clearly am academically capable. I think for me, one thing that I would say is I was doing a presentation for my psychology paper, and it was me versus, because it was competition between me versus a student who went to St. Paul's, which is a very, elite private school. And I just couldn't do it. Like I was so scared. And I just remembered, remember your psychology A level, fight for this, and did a really good presentation. And at the end of it, because it was a competition, I won. And I just felt, maybe I am on their level. Maybe I am academically capable. Also, getting good grades helps. Hard work and getting good grades helps. So to everyone else, we'll start off with Rafi, if that's okay. Was there a moment when you were like, I am academically capable?
Yeah, so I think like how I mentioned before, like essays were just not my sort of thing, and I was struggling with them initially. And then there's just 1 week that I got this essay and I did really good in it, and other people didn't do as great. And it was a thing of like, yo, that kid went private school and look at me, I smashed them. Like, I went to state school and look at me, yeah. And that's how it feels, honestly. Sometimes you're just like, look, they're at private school, they should be doing better, but they're not, you are. And remember that, like, the fact that I think a lot of people think like, oh, I'm not good enough to be here, like, I'm not as great as everyone else. And sometimes you might not be, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean you're bad. Like, you're still amazing. And I think sometimes we forget that initially these kids who do come from private schools, they are used to this Oxbridge teaching. Like, this private schools kind of provide that for them, so that they're kind of used to it in the beginning. So you might be struggling there, but then afterwards, watch how you like reel them. It's fine.
Yusuf, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I guess for me, mine was during a tutorial. My tutorials were all one-on-one, but during one of my history and sociology tutorials, I referenced a point made in a book called Natives by a Carlos, very good book. He's quite a well-known poet, author. He does music as well. And I mentioned some examples and points from his book. And then I saw my tutor's face light up, and then she brings out her copy of Natives as well and shows me that she's been reading it. And then she was like, you're the first person on this course to bring in, I can't remember what it was, but to mention this point, and you've really analysed it a lot better than everyone else so far. And I guess being an ethnic minority made me more inclined to read a book like Natives, as opposed to someone who's white, middle class, goes to private school. So in that respect, it made me feel quite proud that my extra reading is actually getting me somewhere.
Sabio, do you want to go next, and then we'll go to Sama after?
Yeah, I'm going to be cheeky because I have two. But my first one is that on foundation years, you have to reapply to Oxford. So I reapplied for undergrad and I actually got in again. And I have like really bad imposter syndrome. So I was like, oh my God. And everyone was like, you done it. And I was like, oh, maybe I should be here. You know, that couldn't have been a mistake twice. And then my second one is that one of my tutors, I love her, but she's a bit mean. So once she said to me that it wasn't a dance around the answer, it was a race to the answer or something like that. Like, it was really mean, basically saying my essay was really bad. But then we got our results at the end. So in foundation year, you're marked out of 10. And if you get a 10, you're kind of a math student and got all the answers right. And she actually gave me a 7. And I thought she hated me. So I was like really happy because I was like, oh, maybe I was doing well. Those are my two kind of moments.
You know, it's funny that we talk about tutors that make us feel kind of sad. I remember once my supervisor for psychology was marking my assignment, and my previous assignment for a politics paper, I got like a first, a really high grade. I was happy. And then this psychology assignment, she didn't even mark it. And I was like, who do you think you are? I'm a bit of a drama queen. So I was like, who do you think you are? I hate you. Like, not to her face. And I remember just crying. And I was like to my my director of studies, who's in charge of my academic well-being, I was like, I don't want her anymore. Can you please get me a new supervisor? And at the end of the year, she was my favorite supervisor. She pushed me to my hardest. And I think sometimes you, like, again, you know, we wanted that encouragement and we need that. So yeah, it's sometimes you need tough love academically. But Usama, can we go to you? What was your...
Sure, I'll be brief, but you know, I'm Asian, right? So I was supposed to study medicine. So I actually did physics, chemistry, biology, and maths at A level. And so I always had this really serious inferiority complex about, you know, can I do the humanities? And I actually came to sort of like Oxford in a really roundabout way because I was supposed to go and study medicine. I took deferred entry into medicine. I studied Arabic for a year. After a year of Arabic, I'm like, I'm not doing anything else. I'm going to study Arabic. Much to the disappointment of my parents at the time. They're very happy that I'm teaching at Oxford now, so it's great. And basically, you know, I was really concerned that I've not done any A levels in humanities. I didn't do great in my humanities subjects at GCSE. How am I going to do this? And when in my sort of, I think it was in my first year in the later terms, at one point I got a first on an essay, and it was just like, I've made it. So, you know, those sorts of moments are quite important. And I think, you know, there's a lot you can do. It's about working hard. It's about passion, but you'll make it. You're going to make it.
And having said that, I want the last question to be, because we've got to wrap up in 5 minutes, is we've had a lot of questions from the audience, you know, how do I make a strong application? What do I add in my personal statement? It'll be great if you could all kind of think to yourself, what is obviously there are many tips, but what is the kind of a tip that you found really important when making an application that you would recommend? I think for me, one thing that I would say is, and this is probably to those individuals who you made your application and it's kind of for your interview, a question that you always have to ask yourself is why? You know, why do you want to do the course? What is it that makes you so passionate? And so with me, I had my personal statement all written, and after every single sentence, I wrote a question mark. So I want to do this subject because of X, and the question mark, why? Based on my past experience, I learned I like this, question mark, why? You cannot ask after every sentence, like, why? Because essentially that is what, you know, your interview is going to be about. It's trying to get into those, you know, reasons that you can't put on paper as to why are you so passionate about this course? We'll go in order. So we'll start off with Sabia, Yusuf, Rafia, and then Usama. Just a general tip that you have. And by the way, Sabia, congratulations for the offer. So yeah, now that you've done it, you've made an offer, what would you say was a really important tip?
Thank you. Yeah, I think so. One thing that I actually noticed, because obviously I applied twice. I applied in 2019, I think, and then I applied again. And one thing I noticed between my two personal statements is my first one, I'm explaining, oh, I done these A levels and they're going to help me with this. But then my second personal statement, I discussed topics, and I think that's really important for law. So one thing I discussed was R.V. Nicholson, which is a human rights case. And I kind of just went a little paragraph, wrote what the case was about, wrote my opinions on it. And then I linked that back to law and why it interested me in the law. And I think that's really important, because it's all good and well saying, oh, I done A-level law, so I want to do law. You want to explain what you've done outside of A-level law. Like, I've read this book and I've learned this and this is my opinion on it. I think that's really important.
Quick follow-up question, actually, because we got on the platform for this event, somebody asked a question last night, which was, do you need to have work experience in that field that you're studying? As someone who did psychology, I did not need to have psychology work experience, but I did have to have a passion for psychology, and that was inspired from just the academic side of things. What about law, Sabia?
Yeah, law is literally the same. You don't need any work experience. If you have some, great. They're really not going to penalize anyone. If you can show in different ways that you actually went outside of your subject, I think that's personally better. But it won't make anything. It won't lower your application. Sorry.
Yusuf, do you have any advice?
Yeah, following on from what Sabia said, the exact same thing. You have to show what you've done beyond your subject. For me, everyone studying history has done history A-level. There's no point saying I studied history A-level, I really enjoyed it. Everyone's done that. You need to show what you've done more than the average person. So for me, I use my wider reading. There's a book called Inglorious Empire on the British Empire in India. So I took a part of that and I analysed it and I gave my opinions on it. And then I gave another passage. I mentioned another book, gave my opinions and thoughts on it, and as the main part of my personal statement, and discuss why I'm interested in it, what I've done outside of the subject. And I think that's something you really need to do, is show your extra reading outside of the subject, because everyone's got A's at GCSEs and A-levels. You need to show what you've done beyond that and demonstrate your passion from what you've done outside of the classroom.
So I think one thing people forget about with medicine at Oxford is that it's really sciencey. When we think medicine, we think like doctors, hospitals, all clinical stuff. But for Oxford, that doesn't happen until 4th year. So when you're at the interviews, they really focus on the science stuff. Like out of my 4 interviews, I got 3 of them on science stuff. So what I would say is like read around. Like with A-levels, we just have our textbooks, like Google stuff and research stuff. Read like BMJ articles or like the New Scientist articles and read about stuff that's outside like your A-level spec. And once you get there, like in your interview, they'll just show you graphs. Like for me, it was just a billion different graphs and they were like, explain this, why could it be this, what could it be this? You really have to think outside the box. It's stuff like you have to go out of your way to read these articles, think about it and think like like an interviewer, what could they ask me about it, why would they ask me about it? And I think that really helps. Like I'd go through I'd literally Google random science graphs and like just think, let me like think of these questions, and then I'd research the graph afterwards, find out where it's from and like try to get the answers. So I think that helps you like kind of think outside the box. And another thing, just like touching on work experience, I know with like medicine, obviously they say, try to get work experience, it'd be great, but they don't really care. It'd be amazing, don't get me wrong, but if you do volunteering or something, that'd be even better, like to talk about that. So I think do that.
And then Usama?
Okay, sure. I'll be brief. I understand we're very short on time, but I have a slightly different take, which is I think everything everyone said is absolutely fantastic. I just want to add something, which is try this. Go to the undergraduate handbook for your subject, download it, and basically read around in the first year. Show that you're motivated enough to read in advance what's on the curriculum, and then present an interesting discussion in the way that everyone's talked about based on that reading. And then remember, read enough of it and be interested enough to be able to think on your feet about it when you're invited for interview. That would be my take.
Oh, wow. We're all just here like, okay, put question marks on your personal statement. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so first of all, thank you everyone who has taken the time out to speak on the panel. We do have a few questions that are a bit more personal about certain colleges. And one thing that, if you go on the web page, the platform that this program is on, in the left tab, there is a contact us, and then you will find some of the students who are speaking here as ambassadors. Drop them a message to ask about specific colleges or about specific courses. But again, thank you so much, everyone who participated. Thank you so much, everyone who's watching. There is another panel at 4:30. We will see you then. But yeah, just thank you. Thank you so much.